Today is the 24th of Tammuz, the 30th of July. We're continuing with chapter 11 of Shorish Mitzvah Tefillah in Derech Mitzvosecha by the Tzemach Tzedek. Okay. So now we said that every day there's a glimmer of Rosh Hashanah. That every day the whole world is recreated. And when we feel that is in the Shema. The Shema is the idea of going to Hashem who has no name, who has no, before any kind of contraction, any kind of enclosement. Now he explains to us that on Rosh Hashanah, the way we do this, we feel, we reach this state that has no name, that has no utterance, is through the shofar. Because the shofar is a simple sound. And what that's meant to awaken in us is the unhindered connection to Hashem, unconnected to anything, like just to Hashem directly. And that's what we do in the first pasuk of Kriyas Shema. And he said that that's why the sages say, and you have to think about it, because I didn't mention this yesterday. He said, the sages and Talmud tell us that the first pasuk, the first verse of Kriyas Shema, Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad, is Kabbalat Ol Malchut Shamayim, taking upon us the yoke of heaven. What is the shofar? The shofar is the same thing. It's taking upon us the yoke of heaven, because what's the shofar? The shofar is the appointing of the king. That's what you do. You blow the trumpet. You blow the shofar. In the Beis HaMikdash, they even had trumpets with it. But the whole point is that we're making Hashem king. So it's the same idea. And the whole idea when you make the king is that you don't come and you ask, so let me see how you tie your tzitzis. You don't ask him, so what are going to be your policies? That's not that's the opposite of a king. A king means, I accept you regardless. Like the way that they accepted Hashem at Mount Sinai. Naaseh v'nishma. We'll do, and then we'll hear. What will we do? Whatever you tell us, we'll do. And then we'll hear your reasons. But it means that, first of all, there's a connection that's called taking upon oneself the yoke of heaven. So that's what we do in the first verse of the Shema. Okay, so that we'll have to see. That is going to, there's going to be a lot of discussion of that. Vinay, so we're on page Kuf Kaf, on the top. I'll read it again. I think we read some of this. The main way of drawing down the life force, drawing down the life force means the infinite revelation of Hashem. That means bringing down Hashem who has no name from the infinite on Rosh Hashanah is done through the shofar, kayadua, as is known. Nishmato Eden. He's talking about his, or maybe you know what? Maybe it is Kabbalah. Maybe it is. He's talking about Kabbalah. Mikvod Dushatam Nishmatam Eden. V'nirmaz gam ken b'ktsara b'igeret hakodesh dibur v'mtchil la'orer ta'ava. And this is discussed in, I don't remember which epistle this is in Netanya, but that's the one where he discusses why all the life force from the previous year leaves on the eve of Rosh Hashanah, and then we bring back down new life on Rosh Hashanah itself. וכמוכן יובן למשכיל בבחינת המעיין המעין זה בדרך פרט שבכל יום. And this same thing occurs in a smaller sense, but every day. שבאמירת פסוק ראשון דקריאת שמע, when we say the first verse of קריאת שמע, and now he says, he adds here in parentheses, ואפשר עד בכל לבביך. It could be that it's not just the first verse. It could be that it's Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu, Baruch Shem Kvod Malchuto Le'olam V'ed, and Ve'avta et Hashem Elokecha B'chol Levavcha, until B'chol Levavcha. B'chol Nafshecha B'chol Modecha is already not part of this. But it could be that when we say you will love Hashem with all of your heart, that's also included in Kabbalat Ol Malchut Shamayim. Because with all of your heart, what are we saying? We're saying B'shnei Yetzarecha. B'chol levavcha means with both your inclinations, the good inclination and the evil inclination. How could it be? How could the evil inclination be part of loving Hashem? But when you speak about Hashem who has no name, who's beyond everything, So there you can say that he's also above good and evil. So I'm like, so I think that's what his thinking here is. The Beha Pligatanai, Rav Papa היה קורא אי עד על לבבך בעמידה או פסוק ראשון לחוד, אין שם. So I don't remember the Gemara right now. I'll have to look in. Whether it's until עד לבבך. There's a whole question. I'm not sure if this is there's a whole question in Shema. When I read it, when I prepared this, I read it wrong. And so I remembered one machlokus in the Gemara. But I don't think it's this machlokus. There's a machlokus about if you're walking, and the place that this happens is if you're in a levaya, you're at a funeral, and you're carrying the bed of the deceased. So can you say Shema if it's time to say Shema? So you have to, because it's time to say Shema. So what do they say? You have to stand. You have to stop.
Okay.
The question is, how much do you have to stop?
Till when?
So when?
You need to stop and to leave the bed.
What?
You can give it over.
Okay. In any case, if everybody stops, you can say. And then the question is, how much do you need to stop? So the opinion that we do, this happens to me a lot, because I say a lot of times I say the korbanos before the davening when I'm walking here. So I get the Shema. I have a Shema in the korbanos that I have to say. So I stop. Until when? Until Hayom. It says until the word Hayom. And I didn't read this right when I read it. Hayom is the second verse. ואהבת את השם אלוהיך בכל לבבך ובכל נפשך ובכל מאודיך, והיו הדברים האלה אשר אנוכי מצווך היום על לבביך. And so I read it as that al levavecha, not bechol levavecha. But no, he says here. He says, no, I read it right. Sorry. So it says, Rav Papa היה קורא, I ad al levavecha. That's the second levavecha. Yeah, it's the second verse. It's the end of the second verse. So I was right. It's just, now it took me for a second. Be'amida, or pasuk rishon lechud. Or is it only the first verse that you have to stand? That's the machlokas. But then it's a little strange because he says ve'efshar ad bechol levavcha. See, it doesn't fit the machlokas. That's my problem here. He should have said ve'efshar ad al levavcha. And he says bechol levavcha, which is the first levavcha. Okay, so I don't know.
Could be a mistake.
It could be. Maybe there was a mistake. I didn't get a chance to look. In any case. So this is just in parentheses. It's an issue in and of itself, but we understand the point. The point is that this is Kabbalah's Ol Malchut Shemayim. This is. I'm not. על ידי האהבה שבבחינת מאודיך, וידוע גם כן שצריך למסור נפשו באחד. So now he explained to us, first of all, where we see this. Where do you see in the first verse? This is the first explanation. Where do you see in the first verse that it's Kabbalat Ol Malchut Shemayim, that you're going beyond everything in reality, that you're going beyond everything you know? So he says that the sages say that you're supposed to be willing to sacrifice your existence when you say the word Echad. To sacrifice your existence doesn't, and this we learned, if you remember, we learned this when I think we were learning tzitzis. I think that's where we saw it. That there's two times in the davening that in the shachris that a person should feel that he's willing to sacrifice himself. The first time is in the first verse of Shema, and the second time is in Nefilat Apayim, when we fall on our face. Right. Remember?
Yeah.
But we said there's a difference between the two. That in Shema it's intellectual, and when you fall on your face in Nefilat Apayim, then it's practical. It's much more actual. That's why, I don't know, whenever a woman asks me if she has to say Nefilat Apayim, so I say no. I can't see it because it's too much. It's not shaykh. But in any case, in Shema, this sacrificing myself is really an intellectual exercise. So what's the intellectual exercise? The exercise is that there's nothing here except for Hashem. And when I say nothing here except for Hashem, including me, I'm not here either. And Hashem, and Hashem is the Hashem that I can't define beyond everything that I see. Because so I was hoping you wouldn't ask. So he says that the love is like when love is strong enough, bechol meodecha, it becomes like kabbalat ol malchut shamayim. That out of love I accept the king. כן? meodecha זה הכוח שלך. כן? So Rav Steinsaltz used to say, אז כתוב שכן, שזה יכול להיות, כן. והיום לא. Today also.
אז היה מוידך על בדיזור.
כן, אבל גם היום זה. So, meodecha, so Rav Steinsaltz used to say very nicely that it's with all of your more. Me'od is more. So what it means is that you can always do more. So that more is something you should dedicate to Hashem. That always doing more.
אז יוצא פה על ידי מה שבחינת מודיך, זה לא רק הפסוק הראשון.
Right, that's what he's saying. That maybe continue, meaning that the love for Hashem is what causes me to accept His sovereignty. הנה על ידי זה הוא גורם אהבה, על ידי הוא בחינות עליות החיות, עד המקור הראשון הוא אור אינסוף ברוך הוא. With all these things together, that he's Moser Nefesh, that he's sacrificing himself. Again, intellectually. There's nothing here but Hashem. That he's dedicated to Hashem, like Naaseh v'Nishma, whatever you say. It's like a coronation of a king, like the shofar. All these things together, they lead to one thing, that you're going to the first source, the first everything, which is without definition, the infinite revelation of Hashem. להמשיך משם חיות חדש, ממש. In order to bring down that revelation. ובהיות כי המשכה זו ראשית התגלותו היא בחוכמה עילאה שהיא ראשית האצילות. So now he says that we have a problem. He hasn't said it yet as a problem, but it's a problem. The problem is that there's only one thing, according to the Magid of Mezrich, but this is one of his biggest innovations in Kabbalah, and it's throughout the Tanya, he repeats it many times. It's a very big deal, this thing, that the beginning of all revelation is through the sphere of Chachma. All revelation begins through Chachma. Chachma is the first kli, it's the first vessel that can contain anything, but what's different about it from any other vessel is that it can contain the infinite. Rishit Idgalut Ein Sof. That's how the Maggid said it. The beginning of all revelations, anything that's infinite, comes through wisdom. It's right. There's no definitions yet. So what would that be like? That's like what they're looking for. If you really want to think what it's like fusion today. A fusion reactor is trying to mimic what the sun does. So it's taking two atoms and it's banging them together, and there's a lot of energy released if you're able to create a new atom out of them. So that's called a fusion reaction. It's not like an atomic bomb, because an atomic bomb is taking an atom and splitting it, and that also releases a lot of radiation. But this just releases energy, no radiation, clean energy. The problem is, what do you put this thing in? The sun isn't in anything. It's just a fusion reaction that's going on because it's in space and there's nothing, right? Like the famous joke about the whoever it was that said we're going to send a probe to the sun and land on it. And so how are you going to land on it? It'll be liquefied before you even get anywhere close. So, no, we're going at night, right? So it doesn't work with the sun. Doesn't need to be anywhere. It's a fusion reaction in the middle of space. So how do you create conditions like that on Earth to have a fusion reactor? So what do you put it in? It's like you make an acid that eats through anything. So what do you put it in? Right. What do you put it in? So an acid is actually not that difficult. There are solutions. But for a fusion reaction, when you put this thing in, how do How do you control it? So the answer is they have all these lasers creating a plasma around the reaction, and that's the way they're going now. And they've been doing this for about the last 15 years, and it's getting better and better, and they may actually do it. But here you have the same problem. You have the infinite revelation of Hashem, and you need to have some way to relate to it. So what do you put it in? What do you put the infinite in?
That energy needed to do the laser.
Right, that's the problem, that it takes a lot of energy. But
You need to put it on.
because if you want to have any connection with it, you have to have some way to relate to it. So not even putting it in, but having some way to relate to it.
No, when you say Shema, you said do nothing. You don't need to
Can.
relate.
Oh, okay, right, exactly. So that's the answer. The answer is, and I don't know how you take this and transport it into the fusion problem, but the answer is, Chokhmah is not a kli. It's not a vessel the way you think of a vessel. All the other sfirot, from Bina and down, from understanding down, they're vessels. They're actual vessels. But Chokhmah is special because the moment you understand that Chokhmah is self-nullification, that I don't exist, so now you understand that it's nothing holding something. It's a completely different concept. I'm not trying to hold it. In fact, what I'm trying to do is stay clear. If I'm gone, that's what's going to appear. Right. The more I can feel myself to not exist, whatever that means, but the less I experience myself, the more room there is for the infinite to reveal itself. So that's why Chokhmah always has to be involved in this. Wisdom always has to be involved. You can't get away from it. Now, what's the problem? The problem is that anybody who learns Zohar knows that the Zohar says that Shema is in Bina. It's in the world of understanding. Because what is Shema? Shema means le'avin, to understand. Shema means to, not just to hear in the sense of you hear a sound. It's to listen, to understand, to integrate. So how could something that is asking me to be intellectual contain the infinite? That's never going to work because my intellect is always limited. So he says the Chiddush is, and this is where Kabbalah goes, and you have to go in this direction, is to say that when I say Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad, I have to be using wisdom. Meaning there has to be a nullification here. If there's no nullification here, this is not going to work.
It's a steer.
So it's not a steer, so we call it a unification. What are we doing? We're going to unify wisdom with understanding. That's called the unification of Abba and Ima. Now when you understand this, first of all you understand that it's not so simple to do this. What? Yichud Abba ve'Ima. So we have to do them both. So he says that's a problem. וביות כי המשכה זו ראשית התגלותו בחוכמה עילה, שהיא ראשית האצילות, וגם היא הכלי לגילוי אור אינסוף. Now because any kind of revelation of the first source has to come through wisdom, which is the beginning of the world of emanation, and again, and is a vessel for the revelation of the infinite revelation of Hashem. But again, it's a vessel for the revelation, meaning because it's not here, that's how it becomes a vessel. לכן מבואר בפרי עץ חיים שבקריאת שמע הוא ייחוד אבא ואמא. So the solution that the Arizal brings is that this has to be, again, because the Zohar says, and it also stands to reason, because that's also what the Gemara says, the Talmud says this is, Shema is intellectual. So he says there has to be a unification here between the intellect and the self-nullification, between Abba and Ima, between the father and mother. דהיינו, המשכת החיות והאור מאור אינסוף בחוכמה, ומשם נמשך לבינה שאין בחינת עין ויש תרן ראין דלא מתפרשי. Now, he says, what is this unification? It's called the unification between the nothingness and the somethingness, the non-being and the being. That's really what Chokhmah and Bina are, non-being and being. Now, in the face of it, you would say, how do you connect these two things? You can't connect these two things. So first of all, we see that there is such a thing in the world. We mentioned the sun. The sun is an example of something that's suspended in non-being somehow, and it's giving off the most being there is.
Okay.
It's the source of all the radiation, all the energy that makes everything here possible. And yet it itself is somehow suspended in the the usual picture in Kabbalah is a little bit more complex, but it's on the same principle, that when Chokhmah and Bina unify, there's a unification of something, the being, holding non-being inside. It's not like the sun that's like suspended in non-being, I would call it, but rather it's that the Toleh Eretz al Blima, kind of like all the but right. So there it's a little bit different. Here what we're saying is that the nothingness infuses into the being. The feeling of nothingness is infused within the being. That's the usual description in Kabbalah.
Say that again.
So what you would imagine is that I have a vessel, and the vessel inside has nothingness. So that's the way I imagine myself. Meaning, it's also what I particularly use when I'm saying Shema. One of the things I use is the feeling of myself emptying from the inside out. Emptying not from the outside in, not from the inside out. Because what I'm saying is that the nothingness is Hashem. What I call nothingness is really the nothingness of myself, the non-being of myself. And if I can reach that state, then Hashem appears. So the non-being goes from the inside out. That's the description of it. Or it's called Nekuda Be'ichala. In the Zohar, it's usually called a point inside a room. So it says that the non-being, the Chokhmah starts at a point within Bina. Bina is the room, it's the chamber, and it starts spreading out and filling the entire chamber until everything is Ein. Right. The Bina is the chamber, and the point is the wisdom. No, the Bina is the chamber, and the point inside is the Chokhmah, and it spreads.
What spread?
The nothingness. It begins to take over. Okay, so here we'll end today. And Zrat Hashem will continue tomorrow. This is a very interesting part of this discussion.